Hello, everybody, and welcome to the RFP Success Show. We were having a little bit of audio difficulty. I thought we had it fixed, and now I hear it again. So I apologize if you hear an echo, but we're just going to plow through it. I'm Lisa REHUREK. I am your host of the RFP Success Show. And today my guest is Jennifer Zonneveld. I always call her Jen, so that's why I hesitated. Jennifer Zonneveld. Jennifer is Director and Site Manager. I have to read this because it's long. She's Director and Site Manager, Guns Operating Unit, Armament Systems for Northrop Grumman Defense Systems. Whew, that's a mouthful. Jen, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Lisa.
Oh, we're so excited to have you here. So I love to have conversations with people like Jennifer because Jennifer is in the defense military world, right? And they are serious when it comes to RFPs. I mean, we're talking about really big deals here. We're not talking about a $50,000 or $100,000. We're talking millions, billions. Is that a correct statement, Jen?
Definitely millions, I would say. But you know what? We accept RFPs because we sell spare parts for very low amounts as well. So we kind of deal with the gambit.
That's true. I was reading some of the material she sent me, and they respond to thousands of RFPs in a year, and they do run the gamut all over the board. And so what's kind of fun about talking to her is that we're going to be talking about what makes these successful for them. And particularly when we're talking about those really large opportunities, you can't really afford to be bidding on a lot of those and losing, right? You kind of have to have your shit together right out of the gate, or you're going to be in trouble. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in and ask you, how do you even determine what RFPs that you want to bid on?
Well, typically, you know, even before there's an RFP, we know that there is something happening, especially in our industry. The government is allocating budget. So we look at where the Army budget is or the Navy budget and what they're funding. And so these things are predetermined many years in advance. And so what we'll do is that we know that certain things are happening before there's even an RFP. Typically, you know, there's even source assad and RFIs, you know, years before there is an actual RFP. So we start way before the beginning. And we have to do that in order to be ready for those RFPs. So we have teaming agreements sometimes, depending on what it is that is being offered. Sometimes on our international proposals, there is a in-country content. And so we have to develop partners in those countries, maybe a joint venture. So we have to start way earlier than when we get an RFP. But you're right, there is a limited number that we can do, especially the large ones, because they are large efforts and multiple resources in order to execute them.
And on those that you know are coming, I mean, these are still competitive bids though, right? Like your competitors also know they're coming. Is that a correct statement?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And so that's why developing your strategy well before you're actually trying to answer, you know, a written response. That's why we need to work them well in advance.
So I love that you just mentioned strategy, because we talk about this with our clients all the time, that if you don't know going into that RFP anything and it's just a cold opportunity, could you get lucky? Sure. We've had a couple people get lucky. But at the end of the day, there is no way you're going to win those bids when you're going in cold. You've got to develop that strategy up front. So how do you all do that? Like, how do you develop a strategy? Do you have a team of people that are out there kind of looking for, like you were saying earlier, you're looking at the government, what the government's going to be putting out. So do you have a team of people that are focused on kind of that pre-bid strategy before the RFP even comes out?
Yep, absolutely. So we, part of our organization, we don't really have sales per se. We have what we call business development.
Yep.
So it's about developing that pipeline of business. And so what we have is then, and we have kind of some different levels of it. So we have individuals who are regionally based, and so they are looking at you know, a particular you know, Western Europe, let's say, and so they're looking at what those militaries, what those governments are spending their money on, and what programs that they're going to implement, because you just don't go implement a large vehicle or defense program, because those are billions of dollars, without the support of the governments and their funding streams and everything else. So we have business development people who are regionally focused, who are looking at a region of the world. We have people that are domestic focused, and so they're looking and listening to what the customers are saying. There's research and development areas within each one of the within the government and within the military. And so what are they working on, and where are those new technologies going to get implemented? And so we try to spread a wide cast to make sure that we are understanding where the customers are going. And it's really about that customer intimacy. And the more that you can understand what they're doing, where they're going, and dialogue with them well before an RFP really makes the difference. Just understanding their requirements, and positioning yourselves to be ready for when they ask for information, and when the actual RFP is going to happen.
So what's so great about that, then of course you get the RFP in, and hopefully you've asked all the right questions, right? And hopefully you've had the right conversations. How do you feel that helps you? This is kind of a no-brainer question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How do you feel like that helps you now when you're bidding on the RFP, that you've had those pre-discussions?
Well, I think one, it kind of gives you insight for what they're really looking for. Sometimes it's not in the RFP that they want this certain technology, or they want this, specific nuances. And obviously there's a team of people that are going to be reviewing the RFP. So the more that you can understand the perspectives of those different individuals and what the criteria is going to be, the better chances that you have. And I would also say, along with like our RFPs, usually comes some sort of demonstration of our technology. So we know that we're going to have to show our product. It's usually typically not just we hand over a piece of paper, but there is prep work as far as demonstrating the product, and demonstrating our capabilities in advance of actually that RFP.
Yeah, it's really funny. I have a good friend, and she was telling me a story about how they were at the bidders conference. So it wasn't even necessarily it was pre-RFP, but it was the bidders conference. And they were really confused by a bunch of the questions in the RFP. They were like, this just doesn't make any sense. I don't think they know what they want. So they literally asked the question, can you tell us really, like, what are you trying to achieve with this RFP? And it was crickets. It was dead silence. Nobody could answer the question. And they basically said, you know what, I think we need to go back to the drawing board and get on the same page about that. So it's kind of funny. We think that, people are releasing these RFPs. And of course, I think in your industry, they will know this was a very different industry and very services based. But it's amazing sometimes how confusing the questions in the RFP can be. But if you know, and you've got that information up front, and you have that intimacy with the client to have asked that, because once the RFP hits the streets, you can't really ask anything unless it's in that Q&A period. But it's so important to have that data up front.
Absolutely.
Do you guys have standard questions that you ask there, or is it very different just depending on the opportunity?
I would say we don't have any, it's not really standard questions that we ask. I mean, when we're like in a bidder situation and you're asking questions in the Q&A, or you have to write formal questions that get published to everybody, your competitors and anybody else who wants to read them, they're usually very protective questions to just clarify something that is in the RFP. I would say that very rarely is there, open-ended questions about the strategy, because typically you just get pointed back to the RFP, so that no additional information is really being provided many times. But absolutely, we've encountered lots of customers. We've encountered large programs that have been stopped because the strategy for their acquisition was not wasn't going to go the way they wanted it to. And so, yeah, so we often do see the strategies for acquisition or the RFPs get reset along the way.
That's interesting. I spent a lot of time on the other end evaluating and writing RFPs. And it's hard to write, it's hard to develop the RFP as well. And you do find out things when people start asking you questions and when bidders come back and you have really strange responses. So I can totally feel that pain. Now, when you guys lose, this is a question, I got a couple questions for you that I didn't warn you I was going to ask you. So you can tell me that you don't want to answer, but when you lose an opportunity, do you go through a debrief process? I mean, how do you determine why you lost?
Absolutely. We absolutely go through a debrief process. Usually we ask the customer for a debrief, and many RFPs, they're required to do so, to let you know why, how they either rated your proposal and maybe the different criteria, or why you didn't win the proposal. So absolutely, we do a debrief, especially on the very large programs, as far as, was our strategy correct? Was it, was it our past performance? Was it, something in the technical write-up? So yes, it's important to understand those things for the next time.
Do you have any examples of something you might have changed internally because of, like, any kind of a process or approach that you've changed internally because of losses and something that you found out in those debriefs?
I would say yes. Not in my current role, but in a previous role that I had, we found that we were losing a lot, and so we were a little bit perplexed. When you get told you get beat on price, right? And okay, there's price, but sometimes you don't know exactly how much or where it was in the price that you were beat. And so, but I was in an organization and we were routinely getting beat over about maybe a year's time period.
Okay.
And so we had to do an assessment of what it was about our organization versus our competitors' organization. And we had realized that they had actually vertically integrated a big portion of their business. And so we identified that, based on their integration, sort of merger within themselves. They're obviously a large defense company, and they had some restructuring that it might be a competitive disadvantage because we weren't structured that way, especially when we're talking about large corporations, rate structures, how people are organized. And so we actually restructured our organization in order to be more competitive. We combined supply chains from some different, what were separate divisions, into one division to get more buying power with our supply chain, because we were buying maybe not the same components, but we were buying from the same type of supply chain. And so we thought by combining our buying power for those particular vendors, that we might be able to achieve better pricing and put us back into competitive markets. So absolutely, if you really need to evaluate your competition and not just the individual proposal or the individual price that you lost at, to see if if you find something like that can really change. And we moved a whole division, so these were not easy decisions. So.
That's amazing. And I love that you said that too, that you have to evaluate your competition. And, we preach that too. You've got to know your competition. And I find debriefs one of the best ways, particularly when you lose, to be honest, one of the best ways to learn more about your competition. It might not be the funnest way to learn, but it is certainly a great opportunity to find out certain things. In the state government arena, you can get copies of their bids a lot of times. Now, some of them might be redacted, but you could still get a feel for even their writing style and how they approach things. So it's, we always tell people, like, you got to be on top of this. It can't just be, this RFP comes in, you wake up one morning and you got an email, ding, this RFP is here. Let's go bid on it and expect to win. I said that at the beginning, right? Because also you've got to know about your competition. How are you going to set yourself apart in that bid if you don't know more about your competition, right?
Exactly.
Yep. So, all right. So let's talk about your team a little bit. Do you have a dedicated proposal team, or is it kind of all under that umbrella of business development and you've got kind of that team of people that do things, or how does that work on in your world?
So I would say business development is a team sport.
Yeah.
Because the way that we do it, we don't have a particular team that just does RFPs. So really, what it is that, for example, if we have repeat business, so you're a customer, we're doing work for you right now, and you decide that, well, you're just going to sell the same product, but you're going to sell it to a different customer, or maybe that same customer decided to buy 5 more. So typically, those requests, we already have a program manager and an IPT team, and that's what we call an integrated product team. So, engineering, supply chain, contracts that are already working with you. And so those kinds of proposals, we just allow that team to continue to work that. That's continuing business. And so it's much smoother, right? You already know me. I'm already working with you. I'm making deliverables to you. Now I'm just going to deliver you a new proposal for 10 more, or for 10 more, but maybe a different end customer. And then we have business development that's going on that is new. So nobody has sold to this particular customer at all. And oftentimes that is more of what people think of traditional sales and maybe as business development, is that, there's a program going on, or there's an RFP that's going to happen, and we're meeting with the customers, and we're meeting with the different people that, that in order to make our strategy work. And so the new ones kind of get handled by what is our more like our business development team. But it doesn't mean the business development doesn't collaborate on the new stuff, or the program management team who's kind of running the projects, because they're the ones that are going to accept it, right? They're the ones that are going to do the actual execution. So they get, to have their input into the proposal as well, because they know what they can execute. So I would say that it's not, we don't have a dedicated team. That's all that they do, because we find that when we're better integrated into we have product lines.
Yep.
So we're better integrated into those product lines, that overall the strategy for the product is better, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. What percentage of your business comes from RFPs? I mean, do you sole source anything, or is it pretty much 100% you get it through RFPs?
Well, I would say that oftentimes we enjoy a good market share of what we do, and oftentimes we are a sole source.
Okay.
Or we're written, our capabilities written into the requirements. So we do enjoy a good amount of that we're already, and I just say it's good to business development, because we have already worked with those customers.
Yep.
That, and particularly because our customers are the end users. So they're the foreign militaries, but typically we're not selling our product directly to the foreign military. Our product is going on a vehicle, an airplane, an amphibious vehicle. So we're really selling to those major primes, and then they're delivering that to the customer. So when we work both. We work with those primes to make sure that they are integrating and liking our product, and then we also go talk to that end user. And sometimes we get the end user to be like, "No, I really want that," and they tell the primes, "Oh, no, we really want that."
Nice.
We do have competition though, and when we do have competition, so it's not always the case, and it is a case of RFP, and it is competitively bid, and we work really hard to strategically place our capability and what we bring, over our competitor.
It sounds like you're very well integrated. What I love about kind of the structure that you have, what we see a lot of times with, depending on how large the client is they're very siloed. So their proposal team is over here, and then their business development team is here, and then their subject matter experts are over here. They don't talk to each other well. They don't necessarily respect each other well, and they're not playing the same game. I mean, they're playing the same game, but they're not on the same field, right? And we preach constantly, you've got to have a really integrated approach internally to have that culture of wanting to win that RFP and everybody on the same boat. And it sounds like that's what you all have.
Well, that's really what we try. That's what we really try to work towards, right? And
Yep.
so, and we're fortunate. We are a large company, but my organization is only 250 people. So,
Nice.
we can have some of that intimacy with each other to make sure that, we're operating. But I will say that those same issues exist because in my own company, we have complementary technology. So, my particular division sells medium caliber cannons, and I have a sister division that sells the ammo. And sometimes we are not on the same page. And you can't sell a gun without the ammunition. And so, so sometimes we are not on the same page about why we are doing something. And, our customers sometimes ask us for both. So it's not that they're sending one RFQ, right?
Right.
They're sending one, and we both have to collaborate. So, so definitely that even we still experience that just in different ways.
Yeah. I think it's just probably human nature to some degree, but the more that we can do, right, to bring that together, I think is imperative. You have any horror stories from things that you hope you never do again when responding to an RFP?
Horror stories. I don't know that I have any. I don't know that I have any horror stories, but we've had. There's a couple that come to mind. Is that we once had an RFP, and we created a special team. We moved that team offsite so that they could be 100% dedicated to that. It was one of those that was a year long. It was a little bit out of our lane, trying to expand our capabilities and portfolio. And so what we did and I think what the hard part is maybe about after 8 or 9 months, I think we realized we weren't going to win.
Oh.
And then to dissolve that whole, to dissolve the whole thing, to not, get as close as maybe starting to write the RFP. But like I said, we realized that we're not going to win, that we're not positioned very well, and then having to decide to dissolve it, right? And those are hard decisions for an organization that you shouldn't invest anymore. You shouldn't look at the sunk costs.
That's a brutal realization. It's like climbing Mount Kilimanjaro and getting almost to the top and realizing you have to turn back or you're going to die. I heard a story about that. You have to make that decision, right? And you're like, you can see the end, but you're like, if I go for it, I'm going to die on the way back, or I can turn back now. That's brutal. What made you how did you know you were going to lose it?
One of the things there is that our strategy depended upon, there was a foreign competitor. And so our strategy was to partner with that foreign competitor because in the domestic market, it's very hard if you don't have a domestic manufacturing business. Okay. So there's often a lot of rules around domestic product and domestic material being used for domestic government. So for our government, our military. And so our strategy was to partner with them and be a part of their supply chain for this, and so that we would have this capability. But I think and to the point that we were going to prime the opportunity, they would actually be our supplier. It was their technology, but we were going to supply it. And it wasn't enough. There wasn't enough allegiance with the international organization to do that. They had their own strategy, and even though we worked very hard at that, and we identified new manufacturing facilities, and but in the end, it wasn't going to be enough for us to win.
Okay. Yeah. Tough decisions. Yeah. Tough decisions, but if you don't make that decision, losing it is probably more painful than pulling the plug a little bit early.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we've learned some other painful lessons. I mean that was a very expensive and long RFP, but I've lost an RFP over a half a penny.
Oh no!
Yeah, and so and so we were bidding it per part, so we lost over a half a penny per part, and
wow.
And that was a tough lesson too. After we were debriefed by the customer, I think the customer themselves even felt like a little bit bad about the situation because it was such a close competition.
Wow.
But this was more a commodity-based product that we were offering. And so what happened there is that we had all of our costs down. Our competitor had their costs down, but what we didn't consider was what the customer's costs were. And so the customer included their cost as a part of the evaluation, and part of that was their transportation costs. And we happened to be about 1,000 miles further away than our competition. And so when they considered the transportation costs, which didn't have to do with my costs, we lost the proposal.
Wow.
And so that has obviously been a lessons learned in my career, is to not just consider yourself and your product and what you're delivering, but you also need to consider what the customer costs are for receiving, accepting, testing your product over your competitor. So.
Interesting. Yeah, oh man, that's brutal. Do you all, for most of yours, does it come down to price? In your industry, does it come down mostly to price, or is there a value add that can be included in there that you can sometimes win on?
Well, I would say a lot of proposals that we do are not just based on price.
Okay.
There's always a technical aspect to it. Sometimes there's a schedule aspect to it too. So I would say those three things: technical, cost, schedule. I would say that when you're in a commodity-based product, right, something that maybe many people are making, cost tends to be a big differentiator, and it depends on how your customer is going to rate their success criteria, which is important in knowing and understanding. And a lot of government contracts, they tell you performance is my number one, cost is my number two, schedule is my number three. They will tell you that. Other customers won't tell you that. And so you either have to have known or know where they're going to lean. But obviously cost is always a factor. But I'm in a product line that it's more about the technical. So.
Okay. It's interesting. I think, again, it kind of goes back to some of that upfront relationship building and customer intimacy, because, from our perspective and what we see in a lot of the bids that we work on is that you can, if you have conversations with them, you can tell. And sometimes based on the way the RFP is written, you can tell where they've gotten burned on going with low bidder. And they'll give you, they're not just going to come out and say it's not going to be based on price, but you can get some hints from them just based on maybe how they've been burned in the past and some relationships that they have with prior contractors. So I don't know, do you see that sometimes in your industry as well?
Yes, and yes, we do. And obviously we're often a very technical product, at least in my particular product line right now. And so we try to differentiate ourselves with what the capability and the performance that we're offering. But absolutely just understanding maybe what has happened in the past. You find a lot of customers, and I'll say this on an international side, that have, they've gone with the low bidder, they've maybe bought a product, but then they get no support for that product, right? And so we find a lot of times in our proposals to these customers, or what they want to hear is that how are you going to support them through the life cycle of the product, because they've gotten burned, right? Of someone delivering a product and they have no recourse.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and I find too, from my experience, 10 years ago, price was a much bigger factor. And we're seeing that it's not as big of a factor these days. I think people are valuing more the value. What additional value do you bring? How do you support the product or the service? How efficient are you? That probably, I don't know if that comes into play for you all, but I think it's changed. Have you seen that change in your industry over the past 10, 15 years? Or is it always the same?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? It kind of I think the internet connections just slowed there for a second.
Oh yeah, no problem. So we find in our work that in the past 10, 15 years, that has changed. It used to be, states particularly used to be very price conscious, and now they are not quite. They're looking at the big picture, right? The whole package instead. Have you seen a shift in that in your industry also?
I would say in my industry, because we're offering a very technical product that capability schedule has kind of always been in there. I would say yes, from the standpoint is that we have now much more savvy buyers, and they are not just looking for the product, but they're looking for the life cycle support. They're looking for the overall picture, the reliability, the maintainability, the operability of the product. And so they are definitely more educated and are making more requirements in those areas.
Love it. Love it. All right. So share with us, if you would, a couple of success factors. You probably talked about a couple of them throughout here, but specifically share with us a couple of success factors that you find come into play when winning RFPs.
Success factors. So certainly knowing your customer. That's probably the biggest success factor. Just if you can know what they want and position yourselves and be talking to them, that's going to really help you. That's going to really help you out there. Definitely, having a good team, because like I said, it does take a team. In any proposal that we have, there's no less than 10 or 12 people that touch that proposal. So, having a good team that's, focused on putting that together, doing the cost roll up, doing the assessment of the price to win, making sure that we're answering all the questions, preliminary T's and C's reviews on those kinds of things. So it does take a team to do all of that and to do it well, right?
Yes.
So I would say that those are probably the two. I would say probably the two biggest things. And number three is knowing your competition, and who are the stakeholders, that will make the decisions and knowing your competition and knowing the stakeholders.
I love it. I love it. Okay, and then one last question. If you could give, and this might be what you just said, but I'm going to toss this out anyway. If you could give our viewers, our listeners, one piece of advice when it comes to kind of being a winning RFP culture, what piece of advice would you give them?
Winning RFP culture. Well, when I think of culture, I think of people. So I immediately go to that, and that's about the team that you put together to address that RFP, and have you structured yourself in order to respond to it, and who do you have on your team in order to do that, and yeah, I go with that.
Yeah, I like that too, because I think a lot of times also we get the RFP in and we think about this, beast of a task to get done. And sometimes we forget about the people and the team that have to come together to put it together. And if the team is not committed, if they're not motivated, it's going to show in that response. So I love that you called out the people side of things. So thank you. Jennifer, thank you for being here. I so appreciate you. It's always fun to hear from different industries and different successes and even some horror stories, because we all go through it. So we appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm so glad to do it.
Awesome. All right, everybody, you've been listening to the RFP Success Show. You can subscribe for live updates so that you know when we're going live again. You can also subscribe on the podcast platforms, because about a week after this goes live, it gets loaded up onto Google Play and Apple and all of the podcast platforms. So you can certainly subscribe there. And we'll talk to you all the next time. Thanks for being here.